Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Best Foot Forward webinar, the Event Footprints webinar series that is all about making events strategic, impactful, and making a big difference to your organisation. I'm Vanessa Lovatt. I'm the founder of Event Tech World, and I am joined today by two absolutely brilliant people in this area. First up, and I know I can see her name being mentioned many times in the chat already, we have the wonderful Sasha Frieze, who is the author of the Chief Event Officer Playbook, which is a very exciting new book that is about to hit the shelves, as they say, and also Rob Curtis, who is the founder of Event Footprints, a consultancy whose organisation is all about making events measurable, engaging, and impactful as well. So I'm going to invite the two speakers to join us on the stage. Hello, good afternoon to both of you. Good morning to those of you who are joining us from the States. I can see we've got some folks online from the USA. Sasha, welcome. Congratulations. We're so pleased to have you here. How are you feeling this afternoon?
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and talk about my favourite thing, which is transformational events.
Awesome. And Rob, good to see you too. How is your day and how are you feeling this afternoon?
Very excited to have Sasha join us on this, our fourth, I think, in the series, the Best Foot Forward series. And you'll be pleased to know I've got my copy right next to me, full of post-it notes.
There we go.
Yeah, excited about the next hour or so.
Yeah, this is going to be great. So let's, on that note, take note. We are about 55 minutes here. We have fully live conversation. We're going to have some polls on the way through, so get ready to respond to those. We want to hear from you. We want to bring your thoughts into our conversation as well. Please use the chat. In fact, go wild in the chat. There's no limit. Please use the emojis. Please just get involved and use this time. You've committed your time to come and join us. So put it to good use. Get your questions in there and make it count. So let's just set the stage a little bit for how this all came about. I think all too often, still annoyingly, events are seen as logistical. They are catering, schedules, badges, seating, and the things that sometimes the powers that be in organisations consider when they think of events immediately are not what we now know events really truly can be. The potential that events now bring to be to generate shifts in perspective, to generate transformation, to truly impact business results. And that's what we want to talk about in today's webinar. And that is, of course, why we have Sasha here with us. So just before we open the floor to Sasha to explain a little bit more about how this book came about, let's push our first poll live. And this is a really simple poll that is going to give us a bit of an idea about where you feel your events currently are when it comes to alignment with your overall organisational goals. So do you feel right now that your events are always aligning with your business goals? Are they sometimes aligning? Are they very rarely aligning? And that's okay. We've all got to start somewhere with this, or you're just kind of not sure actually today whether you are in alignment or not. Now, whilst you're answering that, another piece of news to add to the start of this, we did promise that 10 individuals who were the first to arrive for the webinar today would receive a free copy of Sasha's book, which will be sent to you in the post. And we will post, awesome, they're there already. Thank you so much, Eliza from Event Footprints. The winners have just been posted in the chat. So we put your first name and the initial of your surname to try and make sure there's no data shared for anybody. Oh, great. We can see someone's very happy already. You'll also receive an email from the Event Footprints team directly, and they will arrange getting that book to you in the post. So congratulations to the winners. We'll also put a link a couple of times throughout the session to Sasha's book, so you can pre-order your own copy as well if you are one of those lucky winners. Right, let's see the results of the poll. If we could please have that up, and then let's see what we're seeing here. Okay, this is kind of what we anticipated might be the case. So just over half of respondents saying sometimes that they feel their events are aligned with business goals. And then it's reasonably equally spread across always. Congratulations to those of you hitting the always button. And then few rarely and not so sure, which is very much what we expected. Sasha, I think this is what we thought we were going to see.
I think so. And I think what it demonstrates is that, brilliantly, there are some people who feel they're always there, that they're there already and they are creating those events that are completely aligned with organisational and business goals. But, there are people who are some of the way there, but there's more journey to experience. So not a surprise. And obviously those people in the rarely not sure, I hope that this conversation gives them some ideas to inspire, what their next steps might be to help create that strategic change.
Yeah. Rob, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I wonder if perhaps for those who've said sometimes, perhaps the assumption would be that they are aligned with perhaps the tier 1 events, but perhaps there are other events in the portfolio where our events teams are being asked to manage and arrange these events without really understanding the business goals. So it'd be interesting if we sort of looked a little bit further in this to see if it's almost centered around different types of events as well.
Yeah. And Rob, when you say tier 1 events, could you just explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so in our world, we sort of refer to tier 1 as sort of the flagships, if you like. Now, whether they are your flagship proprietary experiences or your sort of tier 1 sponsorship activations, they're the bigger budget events, for want of another word, if you like.
Yeah, understood. All right, thank you. So, Sasha, let's talk about your book. We've had a little fanfare for it already, with people happy to be receiving a copy. What inspired you to write this book? I know it's been a little while in the making. How did it come about, and how did it end up being what it has ended up being? Which, by the way, folks, get a copy. It's really awesome. How did it come about, Sasha?
So, despite my youthful good looks, I've spent more than 30 years in the events industry and, running my own event strategy agency, the Business Narrative, working with different clients across a range of different sectors, actually, corporates, associations, but the kind of trade show and conference world that I originally came from, media companies. And over the years, it became clear to me that it actually doesn't matter what sector you're in. The themes and ideas, really resonate across different sectors. And I realized that, there are these shared ideas. And I think also like many people, I sort of explored this with, had in the past been frustrated by clients who say, I was on a list with some non-government organisation for 3 years to be one of their preferred event agencies. And they'd come to us like 2 or 3 times a year and say, we've got an enormous event we need to do in 6 weeks. And I'd say, really sorry, we can't do it. And they'd say, but we really need it. And I'm like, yeah, but next time, just give us more time to work out what it's for. What's the purpose? What are we trying to do? And so I realized that there was this challenge for many people, and I became utterly fascinated with, the events that change things for people, and whether that's a change for individuals, for organizations, or even for sectors. And that just consumed me for a few years. For the last 2 years, I've been, like everybody I speak to, I've been saying, have you experienced a transformation event? What kind of things have affected in your business or professional life? And in the course of the kind of 2 years research on the book, I spoke to over 100 people asking that question. And so for me, I just felt like this is the book that I would have liked earlier on in my career to have a sense of, is there a framework? So I've got a 10-step event transformation blueprint, which is a framework for thinking about how to get that strategy piece right, how to do the thinking up front about the big why questions and purpose. And I think the other piece to it is, no one gets promoted for writing a great RFP or knowing how many croissants to order. And nobody gets a conversation with a CEO about that either. And I think this is a real opportunity for event professionals, whether in corporates or agencies or right across the supply chain, to really raise their game and speak the language of the business. And so that when people get a brief, it's not just about like, okay, I'm an order taker, let me go away, do it. It's about, okay, let's interrogate that brief. Let's work out what we're all trying to achieve, and become unsiloed, get all those stakeholders in up front and have that conversation. So I hope that this is, a call to inspiration for people across the industry to, level up the conversation around the boardroom table.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, back there. Sorry about that. Maybe I might get you guys to mute, and then hopefully that will disappear. Great. Got to love a live event for a little bit of unexpected audio. I loved reading the book, Sasha, because I also came from that commercial background, and it reminded me of some of the things that we used to do day in, day out that I think occasionally have been overlooked actually in today's world. I think a lot of good practice fell out during the COVID window, and it was wonderful to have it reminded to me. And Rob, you, I know, have seen this happen in action, where very senior event leaders have started to be able to demonstrate the strategic impact of their event, and it has led to their promotions internally, because they've gone from having conversations about delivery to event delivery to having conversations about business results. Anything you can share with us on that would be great.
Yeah, I think that was one of the reasons why, when we spoke to Sasha and obviously the launch of the book, that we were very keen to bring her on to the webinar, because I felt that in our industry, there's a lot of senior people that have been delivering amazing events for a long, long time, but actually I felt that, how do we perceive ourselves to, how can we be more strategic with our organizations? How can we, align our events with our business strategies? And I think that's the bit that kind of drew me to Sasha. And when we found out the launch of the book was coming, it just aligned perfectly, because I think there is that opportunity where event organisers and event planners have opportunity to look at this book and really, have that sort of strategic conversation with their organisations. And it's across the board. We see that, events people are run ragged. They're asked to put on a lot of events a lot of the time, and it's about how do we find the time to empower them to have these strategic conversations. And I think the book is a fantastic way of doing that. I think one of the areas which we have, our world, we're sort of focusing on the measurement of events, is events have been very subjectively measured. Did everyone feel good, walk around? And what we're saying is, from event footprints perspective, start sort of objectively measuring it through the data that can be captured. And there's a good friend of ours who coined this phrase FOFO, the fear of finding out. And actually, is there a concern, especially in the times we live in, is that it takes quite a confident and empowered person to have that conversation, to say, this event isn't working for us, we need to relook at it. So that FOFO phrase is one that I've used for the last 2 years around this kind of, there's a fear of finding out if these events aren't performing for us.
As a wonderful example you've just reminded me of, actually, Rob and Sasha. Towards the end of your book, there's a section where you feature some of the technology used at IMEX, and facial sentiment is one of the technologies that's used. So not recognition to our viewers where you're actually recognizing, oh, that's Vanessa or that's Sasha, but just how is that human being feeling at that moment in time. And Rob and I had a great case study. Well, I say great, an insightful case study where a huge FTSE 500 organisation had used facial sentiment to see how different sessions went down at their annual strategy session. And it transpired that the CEO's session did not generate good positive sentiment in the room, and actually was the lowest performing of all of the sessions that took place. And I can't imagine it was through an agency. I can't imagine that was an easy feedback piece to have to provide. However, the FOFO piece, the fear of finding out, isn't it better to know that than to just keep plowing on, delivering the same old stuff?
Absolutely. And, that reminds me of a story I came across when I was researching the book. So I was speaking to the event director of, one of the big consulting firms, and I was talking about this measurement piece, what do you measure? How do you measure? And she goes, well, we try and measure everything through various different criteria. She said, apart, of course, from the CEO's meeting where they've asked us not to measure it.
Yeah.
Because, FOFO, many of, I can see in the chat, lots of us are going to be taking FOFO away with us. And it is problematic because, you know, there's always that balance between like data and insight, but you want to be able to take that learning and feedback and up level your events. And also we've all got so much, you know, continuous partial attention that you can't do the same event you did last year anyway. You have to be continuously, you know, improving the experience and changing how it is. But that FOFO thing, even the CEO had it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've all had it to a certain extent on something, but that doesn't mean we should shy away from it. Now, Sasha, I'd like to ask you to just briefly talk us through. You've got a wonderful slide that demonstrates. So, George, if you could bring up the slide for us. George is one of our wonderful event footprints team in the background. Do you want to talk us through this and how you think we've got to where we are today on this transformation opportunity?
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, I started out, you know, as you did in the 90s in those kind of commercial conference, you know, trade show worlds. And I think this is true of corporate events at the time, that they were very much a product. There wasn't very much to differentiate one event from another. In fact, I worked for Irvin Laidlaw at IR, and he didn't believe in design for brochures because all the events looked the same and it didn't matter. I mean, obviously, you know, the market has matured, and so when there weren't that very many competitors, that was fine. I think, you know, in the early noughties, it was more about service and ensuring that people had a good, you know, customer service experience. We looked after them, and then obviously in the early part of the kind of 2010s, the experience economy, we were talking before about Joe Pine's book, you know, people were thinking more broadly about making sure people have a real experience. How do we connect with them? And that moved on to a sense of emotional engagement. Are we talking to them as real people, individuals? You know, I know when I started out, we thought of the delegates, who were largely blokes in suits, as their job title. And I think, you know, in the last 10 years or so or more, we have been thinking rightly about our attendees as real people, real human people, and that's that emotional engagement. Obviously, the pandemic blew that whole thing up. Everybody was online, you know, that whole Zoom and Crisps thing. There's only so long that one can do that for. I mean, I like to feel that we created, you know, my team created some really immersive, you know, engaging digital events. But, you know, nothing replaces live. And I think the thing that has struck me coming back from the pandemic window is that actually an event has to be transformative to really be impactful. And it has to change something. You know, we need to take our participants or their organizations or our organization. You know, if somebody's got a user conference or, you know, the 1,000 partner gathering, you know, taking the individuals, the organizations, and potentially sometimes even the sector on a journey. You know, where do you start? And that's a real thing to measure. Where do you start at the beginning of that event journey? And when you come out, you know, half a day, 1 day, 2 day, whatever it is later, where do you end? What is that transformation? What is that change? And what impact is that going to have? The transformation doesn't end when people leave the event. That's actually the beginning of the story, where they take that transformation, that learning, whatever it is, and they implement it and, you know, change themselves.
Yes.
And that's the experience that, you know, that's how I'm seeing how events have evolved.
And I would love us in a moment to turn the conversation to the purpose of events. But just before we do that, Rob, I know that you feel incredibly passionately about what happens after the event. And it's not just about what happens in the room at the time, but what happens the day after, the week after, 3 months after, 4 years after. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yes, it's very hard to measure because, as we all know, you know, events are a moment in time. You know, as Sasha said, typically, you know, 2-3 days, whatever. But then, how do you measure the change afterwards? And we see, you know, from a sort of user group conference where they are sort of driven through, you know, getting prospects and customers to our events. You know, it's, you know, how much revenue growth, you know, did we as an organisation generate from that? How did our event speed up pipeline or increase pipeline? So there's a monetary value associated to that, which we'll talk about a little bit later around this whole ROI piece. But I think when we look at internal events and employee engagement events, there's that whole area of talent and making sure we retain talent, making sure that our employees understand our new strategy and they're brought in on the journey with us. That's hard to measure that transformational process after the event is finished, but that's when there needs to be an alignment between the events teams, for example, and the internal comms team to see how that transformation has progressed throughout the business.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. So for any of that to happen, and by the way, I think it's chapter 9, but correct me if I'm wrong, Sasha, there's a whole section about post-event things to measure. But you have to have the purpose set for any of that to have any possibility of coming true. So let's talk a little bit more about the purpose of your events and why the hell they exist in the first place. So again, I'm going to ask if we could get the second slide up now. And Sasha, talk to us about Ikigai.
Sure. So this is a Japanese concept. Actually, my kid who reads a lot of manga introduced me to the concept of Ikigai and many other Japanese concepts. But I love it. Ikigai is your reason for being. And so this is a personal model. So I've thought about this a lot over the last few years. So if I think about me, what do I really love? I love connecting people, bringing them together. What am I good at? Well, I do that professionally. I create events and gatherings, and actually I do lots of, not just professionally, but I do that in my local community. I've been a trustee of a local visitor attraction and a governor of the school, bringing people together. Turns out, I can get paid for it. And absolutely, it's what the world needs. That convening, that connection, that sense of belonging is really powerful. And what I realized is that my Ikigai is community. And actually, I think every event is a community. It's actually what I love about business events, that, you're doing the subsidence litigation annual jamboree, and it's full of all the different kinds of people and all, that whole market of people, all the different players who have something to say or think about or contribute to substance. And so for me, that concept of Ikigai and knowing what your personal reason for being is really powerful. Like, I write a local community newsletter with a friend. It's just a side gig, and a non-paid side gig. We just do it for fun because community really speaks to me. Yeah. And what I've done is I've taken this model, which is this like age-old Japanese model, but I've applied it to events. And so if I can ask you for the next slide, this one here. So this is one of the ways of thinking about it. In the book, there's quite a few different models. There's a purpose plan, and there's lots of ways of looking at it. But this is just one of the ways to think about your event. So what are participants passionate about? That's really key. You want the participants come first. It's not about you. But what does your sector need? And that overlap of what participants are passionate about and what the sector needs, has a sense of mission. But how does your organisation add value? Right? There's got to be a reason that you're doing it that helps differentiate that event from other events. And also your organisation has expertise, hopefully, and perhaps some sense of community. And so bringing all of that together is how you can work out your event's reason for being. And actually in the book, there's a QR code to download worksheets to kind of workshop these exercises on your own or with your team. But I think having that kind of clear sense of why you're doing your event, I imagine that of everyone on this webinar right now, we have all sat in a meeting where somebody says, well, we always do it in December. Not that I think one should do events in December, actually, but, we always do it in December, or we've already booked the venue, or it's the 57th annual. Those aren't good reasons. Those aren't great purposes. You want to have real clarity, and especially in a complex world. Post-pandemic, you need to really encourage and entice people to come and be in person with you. And that clarity of purpose is really important. I have this kind of 10-step event transformation blueprint, and the first question, why are you doing this event, is where you start. What's the transformation? What's the journey? where do people start and end, what journey are you taking them on, what stories are you going to tell? And then from that, you kind of synthesize, well, what is that purpose? And once you've got that clarity, it's so much easier. It's easier for the people bringing the participants in. It's easier for the people selling sponsorship. It's easier for the people working on site at the event, that they've got that real clarity about everybody knows what it's about. So purpose really underpins it.
Absolutely. And I think for anybody who's doing a repeat event, for some reason this sometimes seems harder or less likely to happen. For anyone who's perhaps been in their role for a long time as well and has a certain amount of innate existing knowledge, this can also fall by the wayside a little bit, and we have to be really, really firm with ourselves to not let that happen. Rob, how do you like to see the teams that you're working with approach this, and when would be another question I would ask on that as well, because I know sometimes, when in fact I know both of you have had phone calls of please help, our event's in 3 weeks, but actually that's really the moment has passed by then. So when do you think this sort of effort should take place, both for a brand new event but also for a repeat event?
I think that notion of purpose, is ultimately whose decision is it to run an event. And once we find out who that person is, how can we have those strategic conversations with them? And more often than not, I think it's probably a lot later down the line that us as events teams find out that they have to put an event on, but that clarity of purpose perhaps isn't there. And so I think it's important for us and our events teams to be able to make sure that they are there at the very, very start of those conversations. And find out who it is that's making that decision, really, whether it's a CMO, a CEO, CFO, whoever it might be, but be in those conversations as early as possible.
So bringing those stakeholders in early is very crucial.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with you, Rob. And I think, I don't really want to work on events where we don't bring all those stakeholders into the room up front. If the chief executive isn't in the room for the flagship event kickoff to really talk through what we're trying to achieve out the other side, that is potentially going to lead to moments sort of 6 weeks out of like, well, why haven't we got this? And so having those, what can sometimes be quite tricky conversations up front, actually, what is the deep purpose? Not everybody might agree, and synthesizing that purpose and coming up with, your purpose, statement is absolutely crucial. And to have those hard conversations at kickoff, not 6 weeks out from the event when you're expecting 2,000 people.
That does sound a little stressful. Aaron has also made a good point in the chat that sometimes those people are not the event people. I might even push that further and say very often those key stakeholders are not actually the events people. They're the much more senior, often decision makers who are driving the event. And it's the events team's role to make that vision and purpose really come to life. So let's go into this even further. Could we have the next slide, please? Because Sasha, this is your participant hero's journey. And I know this, when Rob saw this, was like, yeah, this is speaking my language. We're all on the same page here. So let's talk about this in a little more detail. Now, it is possibly a little bit small. So some viewers, you might want to just, if you hover your mouse over the screen, you can click on add on full screen, and that will make it a little bit bigger, or zoom in, however you might normally do that. But Sasha, over to you first on this, and then Rob, I'd really like to hear from you afterwards. What made you excited when you saw this bit of the book?
So this is something I've been thinking about for a really long time, which is there is a massive difference between events who put the participant at the heart of the story and make it about them, and events that don't. And so, of course, many people will be familiar with the hero's journey. Harry Potter's Under the Stairs, Call to Adventure, has an initiation, has a transformation, and returns changed. And so what I've done is I've applied that to the participant as the hero of the event journey. So, the message comes first. They're in the place of they're just doing their regular work, whatever that might be about. let's say they're a pharmaceutical executive and they're doing pharmaceutical things, then they get they get the message about the event, that the content marketing, the social media, they may get quite a few emails, although increasingly, more problematic. They'll look at your website program, and ultimately one hopes that they will register for the event. At that point, they're in the initiation, what I call the welcome, and I've got a whole chapter on the welcome thing. It's so important. I think the welcome starts the minute somebody registers. So then they go through a process of, they're excited about the program, they're arranging their travel, they're putting stuff online, they're sharing their word of mouth stuff, that they're going to that great, pharmaceutical gathering, sharing their excitement online. And that welcome goes right up to sort of arriving and having that opening event welcome. And then the transformation starts while they're at the event, whether they experience that through the content, the community, the connection, the celebration, the entertainment, potentially the ceremony, which I think is an element of events that I see as really powerful, the 30 under 30 or awards, really being part of that community and being celebrated, having that recognition. But then it's about, what is that impact? When they return to their regular world as a changed person, how are they changed? That's really the question. What's the impact? Are they energized and inspired? Are they going to carry on those connections and conversations? I've worked on a number of events where actually the purpose of the event is to bring together people to do deals. Did something with a scientific society, who brought together scientists and corporates. And actually, the value of success was how many people met and basically began startups. And we decided to create an award for them, because that was a way to monitor how well it worked. But how do those connections carry on? How do you foster that lasting transformation? And you hope that they are back in a place where their career is fulfilling and they've got that personal sense of achievement. So they've been on that hero's journey and they are themselves changed. And that's what we're trying to do. What was interesting for me when I was, designing this as part of writing the book is that I sent it to a few friends who were like CEOs, MDs of, commercial event companies. And a couple of them said to me, well, that's not our journey. I'm like, but it's not about you. And I think that, young people now talk about, main character syndrome. Our job as event organisers is to make sure that the participants are the main character.
Yeah. It's very well timed because there's quite a lot of posts on Money 2020 dropping on LinkedIn at the moment, and my goodness, they do this beautifully. It's all about that main character syndrome, which is a very good way to explain it. So, Rob, what was the connection for you here? So I know you guys have 4 pillars, which is how you run. Look at the comment. This says golden. I completely agree. You've had the same feeling. So talk us through the pillars that you work with and how those align, and what made you feel that connection with the participant hero journey.
So yeah, when we sort of started talking to Sasha, and particularly the hero's journey, we agreed, and I think we all agree, that the attendee is the front and centre. It's our most important stakeholder in this whole process. And how do we measure that hero's journey, if you like? And as luck would have it, some of our measurement methodology is aligned to Sasha's 4 pillars. So we provide a data and dashboarding service where we can collect, using, obviously looking at the event tech stack, and often for organisations that either have a fragmented tech stack or a best-in-class approach. Last year we were building these sort of impact reports after the event, but what it soon became apparent was the impact at the end of the event is directly correlated with the types of people who attend the event. So the quality of the audience, the decision makers, the level of industry or geos where these attendees come from. So we looked at our dashboarding service, if you like, and we sort of then segmented it into these 4 stages to align with the event life cycle. So the first stage was looking at that reach and acquisition part. Are we getting the right attendees there? Are we marketing to the right audience, the right industries, the right geo units, the right decision makers, and ultimately are those people signing up to come to our event. Then it was about looking at, and that sort of reach and acquisition sort of area can be aligned to the adventure section of Sasha's hero's journey. Then we looked at the sort of the operations and logistics component. So how, when are these people arriving? When are they checking into the event? Also, because we're working on some of these tier 1 events where there's perhaps a housing component, how do we look at this data to measure our, for the organiser perspective, to measure our housing and contract commitments with the hotels and venues? So looking at the data to report against that, probably more from the organiser's perspective. And then it's again, in Sasha's world, it's the transformation sector. So it's that, how do we measure the engagement at experience and through technology, through the magic that happens at in-person events? So the connections that are made, the content that people are interested in, how do we measure their contribution and how their voice is heard at the event? So, and for many, in terms of our measurement methodology, this is still the number one area to measure against, is that on-site experience where we can look at that sort of engagement and experience perspective. And then it's the impact and ROI piece, and actually, how do we then report on that, and how do we ask questions to our audience, and how do we collect data on our audience, which goes some way to be able to predict the impact of that experience. So those are the 4 stages that we align our data and our data collection sort of methodologies against.
I think we're going to come back to return on experience because I feel there's a lot to consider there as well. But let's ask the audience now. So there's a lot of positive messages in the chat, and everything that you have both just described there is about making events transformative or transformational, to use Sasha's words, for the attendees themselves, which in turn then makes the events transformational for the business, because everybody's winning in this scenario. So this is when events really do become truly strategic. And we're talking about this as if it's easy. We know that none of this is easy. It's really got to have hard. But we'd love to ask you all now a question. What is the biggest challenge that you have when it comes to making events truly strategic? And there are 5 options for you to choose from here. And we've tried to group it down. We actually came up with a much longer list originally and decided that was too long for the purposes of a webinar. But what is the toughest challenge for you? And then the other thing that I'll ask you to do once you've got that answered is think about what questions you've got for Rob and for Sasha, and either hold on to them for now, or even better, put them into the chat, because we will definitely have some time to be able to put your questions directly to both Rob and Sasha. And we want your questions, because the more questions of yours we answer, the more valuable we're making this for you. We want this to be transformational for you as our attendees, of course. So please make the most of that and put your questions in the chat. I think let's get the results up from this and see what you are finding to be the greatest challenge. And whilst that's coming up, Sasha, have you got nails that match your book? Oh, you're on mute. Hit the unmute button.
Thank you for being the first person to ask me to unmute today. Yes, I've had a purple manicure and I've had a transformational butterfly.
I just noticed those when you were a bit bigger on my screen. Very impressive. Right. Okay. Measuring long-term impact and budget or resource constraints coming up at numbers 1 and 2. Lacking insight into corporate strategic objectives. I'm quietly very pleased to see that that's not topping out at the top of the list, actually. That gives me quite a lot of encouragement. Same with the leadership stakeholder buy-in piece as well. So this measurement piece, Rob, I'm going to come to you first on this, because this is your thing. What makes it so hard to get this measurement right then?
It's because, again, I think events are a moment in time, and that's the challenge, is how do you then translate that? How do you then measure that transformation? And as I said before, I think for us, from a sale, if it's a client sort of event, it's looking at around sort of business growth, sales and marketing component. But from a comms perspective, it's looking at if there's a change or in employees based on what they've heard at the event or how they've acted at the event. So that's where I think, with events, we're putting them on, with our employee engagement team or for our sales and marketing team, is that alignment between then how do we measure that long-term impact with those teams. Once we've done the event, if you like, and they've delivered the event, it's having visibility of what those teams do to measure the impact of those activations, be it internal or client facing.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's interesting that the obviously the budget and resource constraints came second, because one of the things that I wonder is there a challenge at people not knowing what to measure and actually how to build a narrative around it. And I think that's an area that Sasha focuses on the book, is that it's important that if you are identifying your metrics that you want to measure the success of the event by, is then being able to articulate what they actually mean. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there's enough understanding of what these data sets actually mean, and support our event organisers to be able to have that conversation, that data storytelling component to our C-suite.
Thank you. And Sasha, what are your thoughts on these results?
I mean, not an enormous surprise, although, and what's great is that there are solutions for many of these areas. So, understanding what to measure, the flip side of that is knowing what to measure, what's the purpose, what are the questions, what's the transformation that you're trying to evaluate. And so I think that links to potentially, wanting to have more of a clarity of purpose up front. Those flat measures of how many people went to which session, those are helpful numbers. I mean, it's useful data, but there are potentially more useful measures. And I think there's a really interesting point that lacking insight into corporate strategic objectives is coming at number 3, because there's a comment from Faye in the chat, basically saying it's less about not having the insight into the objectives, but more about being engaged too far along in the decision-making process. And I think that's that thing we were saying up front, which is however thoughtful and experienced many event professionals are, it is hard in a matrix organisation to be having the right conversations at board level at the right time. And so that's part of the challenge for event professionals, which is speaking the language of the business, but also getting in the right rooms and being around the table, so that you don't get, well, look, we've decided what the event is and it's going to be this. We'll talk about some of the smaller strategic pieces. Yeah. So I think there is a kind of challenge there. And that ties in with, leadership stakeholder buy-in.
Yes, and you do talk in chapter 10. The last chapter is about this storytelling piece, and I think this actually brings us really nicely onto our sort of final part of the conversation today, which is getting in the boardroom with this information. And so there's 2 sides to this. There's the storytelling element. There's taking the information that you have to justify that you should be in that conversation. And I think it would be great to come to Rob first on this. So you just touched on, when you were last talking, the concept of return on event, return on experience, as opposed to ROI, which is a more traditional measurement in business, and perhaps something that your CFO might be more likely to use, or someone else on the board might be more likely to use. But can you talk to us a little bit, Rob, about what you mean by return on event, return on experience, and how we should be using this to our advantage?
Yeah, so for me, I was always fascinated. So our angle is obviously coming from a technology perspective. So I was always fascinated, and I've always been fascinated around how technology can support the live experience. And for me, as we talked about already, our attendees are the number one stakeholder. So it's how can we design technology to support the experience, to provide value back to our attendees. And when I look at what do we class as an engaged attendee? And that is a question that gets banded around all the time. And for me, it's being able to measure when an attendee gets value from the event or the experience. And I sort of have asked myself this question and on numerous times, and I think it's worth us all asking ourselves the same question: what does engagement mean to me? And for me, it was: have I connected with somebody new? Have I learned something new from the content? And have I contributed? And therefore, has my voice been heard? And for me, when I hit those sort of three core factors, that for me, that for me would be a good event. I got value out of it. So what we do is then look at how the technology can support those three areas. How do we connect? How do we learn? And how do we contribute? And then ultimately, how do we measure against those three factors? And that we then on experience, because we can argue that if one of our attendees has a good experience at our event, there's going to be good brand affinity and therefore a positive business outcome. And that can be applied whether it's a sales, a marketing event, or an internal event. And I think there's a lot of we were at Cvent, Sasha and I met at Cvent Connect a few weeks ago. There's a lot of talk around measurement, and I think it's important to differentiate what is return on experience, which I think is easier to measure because it's in the moment and it's data that's available here and now, versus ROI, which is harder to measure because it's that long tail from the event.
Absolutely. And Sasha, how do we then take the data that we can extract from these platforms now, which Rob has said sometimes can be a bit disparate. It's not always as aligned as we might like it to be. There's work to be done there for sure. But how can we take that data and turn it into something that has a place in the boardroom and that helps us not find ourselves in the position that Faye has mentioned and others have clearly found that's resonated with them, where you're being brought in too late to really be able to drive the sort of impact that you'd like to be able to drive? What can they do?
I mean, I think, I'm encouraging everybody to take on that chief event officer mindset, and to think strategically. So just as organisations have a marketing strategy and an HR strategy or a finance strategy, I would really encourage chief event officers and senior event professionals to take the data, but not the raw data, and turn that into insights which tell the stories about how the events made a transformation. So there's a really big difference between saying, and I'm sure many people on this call might not do that, between saying it was great because last year we had 600 people and this year we had 750. That's one measure, absolutely. But I think I would rather be sitting around the boardroom table or talking to senior leadership and saying, the difference that we made is that, our sales funnel now has, 3 billion of new leads in it. And we estimate that over the next 6 months, that's going to turn into, 20 million of new business. Those are the kinds of measures that demonstrate that you as event people have had a poor rap, right? We're just good at getting. In fact, my mum, I'm pretty sure, thinks I just get the tea on and put the chairs out, and so that's not an uncommon perspective. And I think our job is, and I hope that the book kind of helps and encourages people to do that, is to learn this language and talk about what the events do, both right up front, and also get time with your senior leadership. Don't wait for them to say, oh, you never told me about this. Be that person who books in a 5-minute chat with the CEO, make friends with their EA and say, really excited about, the tier 1 event next year, but I need your input to make it work for the business. My sense is that what the business is trying to achieve is, increase sales, better leads, but tell me what you think you want it to do. And so it's acting up within the organization, taking ownership, and speaking the language of the business and demonstrating that what you do really makes a difference.
Thank you. Now, we've had a little commentary on some of the messages that have come through already. There's one we haven't touched on from Jade, which I'm going to put to you, Sasha. And this is quite a big question. It's quite hard to answer without context of what sort of event it is. But when planning ticketed events, what advice do you have for selling out?
So it's a challenging one. I imagine that everybody on this call has had and is continuing to have the experience. I've seen people's booking patterns, which is basically, you launch your event and there's like the hardcore people who love it and it boom. Then you go through a long period like this, which can be quite nail biting until increasingly shorter, 2 weeks out from the event. So you've got to hold your nerve, but also you've got to create, we talked about FOFO, you do have to create a degree of FOMO, but you also have to work with people in the way that speaks to them now. So for example, if I go, everybody never finishes anything anymore. If I want to buy a really fabulous dress on me and M, I might put it in my basket and then someone will ping me and then I'll do a thing. But they will send me an abandoned cart email, right? They'll send me an abandoned cart email. And then the next day they'll say, oh, Sasha, we saw you didn't check out yet. And the tone is beautiful. I mean, whoever the retailer is, they all do it well. The tone isn't, oh, naughty you. The tone is, listen, well, you're so busy. How can we help? Here's a 10% discount. Now, that's the kind of thing that really slick event operators are doing. They are treating their attendees like consumers. And so they are being transparent about the pricing, like showing how many are left. Really, if you're prepared to do that, it can be a bit nail biting, does help. Having really consistent marketing. Don't focus on email. I see lots of people heavily focusing on email, and I see it shifting from, the one to many. Our event is great, or here's a little story about our event. P.S. It's great, book, to that word of mouth stuff. What you really want is your community out there saying, this is a brilliant event. I'm going to be there, because that's going to, when I go to something, what do? I WhatsApp all the people I'd like to see at an event and I say, are you going? And they're like, oh yeah, I think I'm going. So you want to leverage that community piece. You want to treat your consumers well. I mean, I signed up today to be on the mailing list of an event from a major old-fashioned trade show company. And I did fill in the 10 questions they asked me, but I resented it.
Yeah.
And really smart people say, give me your name and your email. They don't even ask for you. They don't ask for your job title. If you sign up to my mailing list, which you can do, I just ask you for your name and your email, because I don't like it when I'd love to know people's job titles and what their event budget is, but it's not about me. It's about them. And so putting yourself in the participants' shoes, thinking of it from their perspective. And in every sector, there are influencers, and I see influencer marketing increasingly becoming a thing, whatever sector it is.
Yeah,
technology, health,
media.
So those are some tips, but Jade, it's tough.
Yeah, it is. The only thing I'll add on is always make sure you focus on the value for the audience, why they should come, the benefits. What are they going to be able to do after coming to your event that they couldn't do before? Very often we slip into what the event is, not why they should come. So really, really focus on those benefits. And you have to be so strict with yourself to not fall into the fun stuff, but the real value side of things. I've got one more question for both of you. Oh, we've just got one more here. No, it's a comment. Great comment from Antonio. Don't think there's a question in there though, but very appreciate that comment. Where are you going to be if people want to meet you? So obviously they can find you online on LinkedIn, but Rob, where are you going to be? Which events? And then Sasha, I'll come to you, because anyone who has one of which they might like to bring it along and you might be able to sign it for them. So Rob, where can we meet you?
So Event Tech Live coming up in a few weeks' time. I think it's week after next. And then IBTM out in Barcelona, which I think is the official launch of Sasha's book. So very excited to be there with her and as part of that process. So yeah, that's me. And then obviously it's Crimbo.
What about you, Sasha? Where can we find you?
So I will be at Event Tech Live on the second day, wandering the halls, up for talking to people. And if anybody's got a book today and brings it along and sends me a message on LinkedIn, we can connect up there. But as Rob said, I am officially launching the book at IBTM in Barcelona. So I'm actually doing 2 sessions there, and I'll be talking through the whole 10-step process and telling some stories. And I'm actually in the process of making a small amount of high quality swag for people who get there early. So yes, some people might get a tote that says I'm an event officer.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I shall be at both of those events too. So that will be the next time I see both of you in person. Thank you to both of you so much for sharing your thoughts and your insights today. I think we've done a great job of covering quite a lot of ground, with reference to the attendee as the hero of this whole experience, event purpose, measurement, communicating those results back up to the board. Clearly, this concept of getting in early with those key stakeholders is incredibly important. That seems to have stood out really quite loudly today, judging on the responses in the chat. So maybe there might be a little follow-up blog we should think about doing on that. Thank you both so much. This has been a complete joy. Thank you to our audience members as well. Thank you for your participation in the polls and your interactivity and engagement. And so, Sasha, once again, massive congratulations on the book, and we look forward to seeing it achieve great things. Thank you all.
Thank you.